Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This presentation is based upon the work that's supported by the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture through the North Central Region SARE program, and specifically the Farmer Rancher Grant program. And you'll see our Farmer Rancher Grant reference there, so that if you would like to go to the website, you'll be able to see reports and updates that we have from our findings. And so we're excited to show those where we are right now with our project and share that with you this morning. Our project is integrating sheep wool pellets with specialty crop growing systems. And we're particularly interested in, excuse me, this as a climate smart commodity, essentially and an alternative to other types of soil amendments, or maybe in addition to or working with other types of organic soil amendments. So we partnered together. We'll tell you a little bit about our team. And so, oops, I just have to do it this way. There we go. And so, as you know, I'm Whitney Schlegel, and my partner, Kip Schlegel, also helped with our project. He's not here with us this morning, but he did a great deal of the planting and helping in pellet making. And so, and then I'll let Rachel and Jonas just say a bit about them, and we'll move to your farm as well.
Nice to see you guys.
And so Marble Hill Farm is the name of our farm. We're a diversified livestock farm. We produce grass-finished beef, wool, and eggs. And so we have poultry, sheep, and cattle. We also grow. You can see we have some high tunnels and a small field, but our land is best suited for grazing. And we sell our products at a number of locations, from farmers market to farm stops. And so it's a direct marketing.
This is, excuse me, Jonas and I are getting over a cold we caught from our daughter, who's 3. So this is a photo of our farm. Mauldine Farm is just down the road from Marble Hill. We're like, I don't know,
3
5
miles.
minute drive. Thank you. So we run a small plant nursery in the spring, and then we have year-round diversified certified organic vegetable production. We primarily sell to CSA program, local farm stop that we helped start, and the Bloomington Farmers Market. And we started in
2015.
Yeah,
and we're a pretty lean team. It's ourselves and one other person primarily that's growing veg. We do about an acre to an acre and a half of intensive vegetable production.
Yeah, and I guess relevant to this, we'll get into it more, but we have historically relied on composted chicken manure for our primary vegetable fertility. And so that comes from big HAFO operations, basically. I always think of it as this deeply ironic thing about organic vegetables, that a lot of them rely on that manure source. So we were really excited about the possibility of partnering with our neighbors who pasture their animals and treat them so well, and to have that as a potential fertility source from just down the road.
So I'd like to kind of frame this presentation in a bit of the problem and solution type of scenario. So one of those might be a solution to using your fertilizer from CAFO production systems. The other problem, really, from a sheep producer perspective, is that wool sheep need to be shorn. They are shorn before lambing and before market, and the shearing costs money. And you can do it yourself, but it truly is a skill. And we have 170 sheep, so And you can tell by my graying hair that that would not be something that would be wise for me to be doing. So I rely on the expertise of a shearer, and most large producers do. So, but the price of wool and the market for wool really doesn't exist. The mid-states, which was a wool, a place to broker wool, so shearers would purchase the wool and then broker the wool, went out of business after it was in 1800s, in business since the mid 1800s. And so that took a Midwest source out of the equation. And so wool is now piling up and does pile up for a lot of people in sinkholes and barns, and there's just not a market. So my passion in the world, yes.
Sorry. So what you're telling me is there's no large wool collector that will turn wool into things?
Right, that is correct. And
Like throughout the country or just like in the area?
there's a very minimal infrastructure in the US right now. We have some small mills, but we do not have any large textile manufacturers that are working exclusively with wool. And so we actually export most of our wool to China, and if we're able to do that. And so, yeah, it's a sad reality of being a sheep producer, so that there is just not a market for this fabulous, renewable, biodegradable product that can be utilized in making lots of things. And we'll talk about all the amazing things that wool can do. And then, of course, I'd love to talk to you more about all the amazing things wool could do, because I could talk about that for probably 50 minutes.
When you
So-
say we, you mean like the United States, does it like?
I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah.
I'm talking about the US market.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, not the global market. Yes, yeah, yeah,
And
Thanks.
you do have your wool processed.
yes. So I do process my wool, small batch. I work with a mill up in northern Illinois. And I'm giving a lunch table from farm to fiber. Come and learn about what resources are available if you are a sheep producer and you do want to move that into fiber production, so that but the resources are limited, and it's costly. And so you got to figure out where the market is well before you decide that you're going to do that. So there is waste wool, and also just in general from shearing, the necks and the bellies are tossed off. And so that waste wool, and then any other wool right now actually that cannot be sold or processed, can be made into wool pellets, is what we can use that for, to be able to return it to the soil. And that's the fabulous thing about wool, is that it is biodegradable, and it has lots of other wonderful properties. So in order for us to have sustainable and climate resilient local food systems, we have to have healthy soil and water. We also need to think about drought resiliency in our growing, and the scarcity of water, dependency on chemical fertilizers, which are high energy production systems. And then how can we better integrate our livestock systems back into our farms? And this is one way, without actually putting the animals on your farm, that we can do that and create renewable systems that reduce waste and maximize our natural resources. So wool in the garden is what we want to talk to you about today as a solution. And around the world, especially in New Zealand and Australia, where sheep outnumber people, the wool is, they have found lots of innovative things to do with wool related to the soil. And so even here, most people who raise sheep have used their wool in their gardens for all the time. When they shear, they use it as a mulch. And it's so it's not like it all goes into the sinkhole, but we do utilize that wool. And so that's shown here. And then you can see some of the other innovative products are mats that they're using for planting instead of plastic. We can have mats, we can have wool pots. We can use this felted landscape so that it can be for erosion control. There's lots and lots of different ways in which we can utilize wool. And in fact, they are doing so in other countries. And so I'd like to inspire us all to innovate and think about ways that we could use this to support our sheep producers and increase the number of these fabulous animals that are light on our land and needed on our land to maintain fertile pastures.
This might be getting way ahead. Where is this purchasable? The like the mats or the like, landscaping fibers and fabric?
You can go online and they'll ship. From there's some, I can give you some different places that I've talked with, and they're actually in Canada. A woman who served as a mentor for me here is just moving into a partnership producing wool pots and mats. So that's another a little bit closer than Australia. So.
Thank you.
We're going to talk today about wool pellets and pelletizing wool that can be then integrated into our soil or also used as a mulch, as a top dressing, and that it is purchased from sheep producers so we can give producers something for that wool. So right now, if a producer is to get anything for their wool, they get 5 cents a pound. And they get 40 cents from the USDA if they file for the product dispensation type of thing. But it's so we want to give a fair price, and so that in turn might attribute to some of the cost that goes into wool pellets versus the other types of organic amendments that you can have. But so we buy the wool. When we shear from wool that's shorn, raw wool, then we shred it, put it in it, and we'll show you how that's done. And then we shred it because some sheep have really long fleeces, and the pelletizer, if you're familiar with pelletizing feed, that can be a problem for the pelletizer. It just ends up wrapping around everything rather than creating pellets. So the shredder is a great tool. And then we create the pellets that then can be integrated into the soil. And knowing that they are also approved by the National Organic Program is really important because that can be wonderful for our growers who are either certified and or would like to adhere to those practices.
Can I add something to
Yeah.
that? So we checked with our certifier. Because sometimes the wool has manure remnants in it, and in an organic system, you have to wait 90 to 120 days from the point of manure application. But because of the pelletizing treatment system, we could just apply it and harvest the next day if we wanted to. So it's heat treated.
So it's heat treated, and so that's also you'll see on your you can pass them around. I have given you some shredded wool so that you can see, and you'll notice that it has a lot of fiber in it, and so that's undesirable if we're making fine garments, but wonderful actually. And the seed, you might even see seeds, but when it goes through the pelletizer and it heats that pellet up, that destroys the viability of any of those seeds. So there isn't a risk of weed seeds ending up in your garden. So yeah, this is what we start with, and so this is just a raw fleece, and then the shredded wool that you have, there's some of it floating around. It's just made into smaller little pieces. Just takes that and shreds it so that it's going to be easier to for the pelletizer to create the pellets. And you'll see that there's a container with the pellets, so that, and you'll give them a sniff. They smell like sheep. And so that you can see the pellets, and they do pick up the moisture in the air. And so that's the moisture in the soil as well. They will turn into, this is just pellet dust. So this is what happens as they break down and they absorb the moisture. so that they, of how high temp, yeah. And so it can go up to, when you're heating, to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So with the steel roller, so that, yeah. So we would like to share with you kind of ways that you can think about utilizing wool pellets as a way of improving soil fertility, adding some organic matter. It sequesters carbon. It's 50% carbon, so it sequesters that carbon. Enhances water storage, holds about 20 to 30% of its weight in water. And so that, as the pellet is put into the soil, it aerates the soil as well as it expands, and it supports the biodiversity of the microbial population that's in the soil. And the scales on the wool minimize pest pressure, and I'll show you a diagram of that in a moment. And it adds a value-added product for producers, a much-needed way of increasing wool production in our country and the number of sheep producers. So our project was to understand how wool pellets integrate into plant systems and into growing systems. And so we're going to, and Rachel and Jonas are going to share how that worked for their system, some of the pluses and the minuses, and a lot of things still yet to learn. So just.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. That photo behind, is that the?
This is a system. I'm going to show you a
sorry.
video of how it
That's really
works.
cool.
So yeah, but yeah, this is the pelletizing system. These are some of my sheep. These are pellets. This is actually wool that's going to go to a mill, but you can imagine, just think of all of that piling up everywhere. And these are beautiful crops from Mevernine Farm. So the pellets are between 9 and 11%, and I'll show you some pellet analysis we did, but in general, we are not the only people that are producing pellets. And in fact, in the last year, it seems like, maybe just because it's more on my radar, but it seems like there's an explosion of pellets. But they have been analyzed, and they run between 9 and 11% nitrogen. They don't have really any phosphorus to speak of, which is really desirable in some growing systems. And they have about 2% potassium, as well as some other products or other macronutrients or minerals. Sulfur and calcium are listed here. The interesting thing about, and this is also true for like feather meal, is that these are both keratin-based products, and they are slow release nitrogen as a consequence of that, versus a chemical that it is nitrogen and you apply it. And and so this slow release of nitrogen is interesting in growing systems, because you may not see an influence immediately that you would see when you apply a nitrogen fertilizer if you applied it at the same rate. And so it may be that the benefit is more long-term. And certainly some of the soil health aspects of the pellets might also be contributing to a longer-term soil health. So that was a couple of people have noted that when they looked at over multiple growing seasons, that they detected that there was nitrogen release up to 2 years later for in a raw wool, not pelletized, but raw wool application to asparagus beds. So there's not a lot of research out there, and that's why we're excited to share with you what we have. And I'll share with you what we do know. But here again is some shredded wool pellets, and this is what it looks like as you can see as it expands and holds the water in addition to having nitrogen, and it sequesters carbon into the soil, since it is itself about 50% carbon. And here are the scales on the wool that I spoke about. where they're obviously this is an electron micrograph, so you can't visibly see them, but they bother the slugs and the snails enough that they have been shown to deter slugs and snails. And so that is a benefit. In terms of other pests, again, we have our own experience, but there is not a lot out there besides this influence. And so this just shows you that, you all know that the soil is a living thing. And so we are sequestering carbon and we're promoting water storage. We're enhancing the productive capacity of the soil by adding organic matter and contributing, therefore, to the biological diversity that we see in the soil. Okay. Here we go. And so I want to share with you a few studies that have been done. Mostly, this is a study that is widely shared from the University of Vermont. And they did a couple different studies. They were also a SARE project. And so they looked at, in this example was published in Agronomy in 2022 from Hagen and Bradshaw. And they looked at a grower standard relative to wool pellet, which is essentially what our study is doing. And then they also looked at, they had a control, and then they had wool pellets applied at a rate that is recommended and is at 25 pounds per 100 square feet, or 25 pounds per 100-foot row is usually what we think about that. So here you can see this is spinach is in green, tomato in red. And you can see that there actually is like no difference between the grower standard and the wool pellets. With the grower's standard and the wool pellets alone gives you a little bit more. Then we have the interesting thing for tomatoes. And the reason I think this study is interesting is that not every crop's going to respond the same. They don't all have the same needs. So the blanket statements of anything should always be taken with caution. So that you can see that tomatoes, we see a little bit more stepwise than we see with the spinach, but nonetheless, that here when we see grower standard, wool pellets grower standard, and even wool pellets without the grower standard, there's not a lot of difference here. And so that was one of their findings, that it is a viable alternative to chemical fertilizers and to other fertilizers that you might have ethical concerns about. And in this study, which was done in 2020, they looked at broccoli is one of the crops they looked at with in different types of soil with wool pellet application. And so that's another consideration. And you'll see here that for the broccoli and heavy clay, there wasn't a lot of difference between the wool pellet shown in gold and the control shown in green. But when you get into the sandy and dry soils, where that water holding capacity of the wool pellet probably kicks in, and not so much maybe the nitrogen, but that water holding capacity, you see that the wool pellets production is greater than the control. And again, every system is going to be different. But in this case, they saw this was a 68% difference in the broccoli production. And these trials that they have done were done on farm. And we know that from our own experience, on-farm research is very messy. You can't control the environment. You can't control a lot of things. So, and one last study I wanted to share with you was with mulching. And those shreds can be used as a mulch or just the raw wool. The Indiana Sheep Association plug is here, and they are giving out free raw wool samples. So give them a try in your own pots and gardens. So this is a project from 2012 that was done in Ohio from what they called Tempe unsaleable wool, which is what this is. This hempy unsaleable wool, way too much fiber in the fiber and just not, you can't do anything with that. So, but you can use it as a mulch. And so they looked at it compared to what they were using, which was a hay mulch. And so they found that with tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, that with the wool, that they had a greater harvest yield in pounds than they did with the other two treatments. And you can see that the control and the hay, interestingly enough, were very similar. So, and they found that the eggplant were healthier leaves, darker leaves, and they didn't have a flea beetle problem, which we often see. And therefore, they reduced their pesticide use, which is another goal. And this one I really like because I tried this myself, actually, deer deterrent. I don't know about any of you where you are, but they're like a major pest. Yes.
That's same for other plants, not just sweet potatoes.
I don't know. I used it with sweet potatoes because the minute I put my sweet potatoes out there, the next day they just go and it slips right out of the ground. So yeah, they like it. And so I don't know that if you were to do like they can do the mow through a lot of stuff, right? But I know that for this, I have successfully raised sweet potatoes for 2 seasons. And so and it's not like they did get a few of them, but they didn't go through the whole thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So a deer deterrent might be another thing to consider. I don't know. So these are our objectives. So we wanted to look at local integration, the key being local. We want people to connect with their sheep producers and connect our specialty crop growers with their sheep producers and get that integration back into our farming system. And demonstrate the potential for waste wool and that it provides look at how the plants respond in the nutrient cycling by looking at soil and plant tissue and some best management practices, and then just a demonstration of how you can actually integrate wool pellets into your system and some of the things you need to consider. And Jonas and Rachel are going to talk about all of those things. So this was, we grew a lot. And as you'll hear, that's probably, we could have scaled that back. We were ambitious and excited, but I've highlighted what were some of the yields we're going to show you for broccoli, kale, watermelon, and spinach from Mabernine Farm. And we both grew potatoes and with different results, and just based on our different farming systems. And so just to share those as well, looking at harvest yield and some quality assessment. We have a lot of other measures and we're in the process of working through our data. And so the growing season actually just ended kind of. We still have a little bit more, so. So making wool pellets, this grant helped to allow for some purchase of equipment. So the SARE grant allows for 50% share of equipment. And so that made it made it possible for me to get some wool pelletizing system, which would have taken me a little while longer to save up for. So it's from Buskirk Engineering, and depending on where you're from in the state, I say Ossian, but I think that has a different way of saying it. I got corrected, but I'm so used to saying it that way. But anyway, wonderful, fabulous group. I have information if that is why you are here and you're interested in getting into pelleting. I do have information about the system and also how it works. So. I have a shredder and a pelletizer, and this is shredded wool shown here. That shredded wool goes into the pelletizer, and it has a die, just like how we pelletize feed, and it's with a steel roller that goes around and pushes that wool through the die. And then there's a knife on the end that cuts them off and it spits out the little pellets. It has to heat up, and so you have to wait a while before you get anything. So the first time you're sitting there waiting, but once it gets hot, they come on out. And the shredder was an addition because, again, of the problems that the pelletizer was having with wool. And it's just like one of those push mowers that we had without the engine, the blades. And that's all it is a blade with the cage, and the wool gets trapped between the blade and the cage, and it shreds it. And then it falls out underneath here and into the bin. And then we take it over to the pelletizer. So I can show you a little bit of how that works. I'm going to show you the, we put in, again, a dinner plate size. So I just kind of use it and everything on roller so I don't have to pick it up and haul it everywhere. And so something along like this size, and we're going to put it in over here, and then we'll shred it over there. So a little bit of an idea of how that works. And normally I wear ear protection, but this was during our field day, and so I did not. And then here is the pelletizer. Noise. Like I said, the rollers can go both directions. So sometimes just to get it, if you're not getting a nice clearance of the bin here, I'll reverse it, and just for the heck of it. But I leave this on just because it heats up faster, and that's what the first while it takes a while for it to be again spitting out pellets. Sometimes it spits out the little pellets that were there from that have hardened in the dye that were there from the last time you made pellets. So it gets kind of loud, but you'll. Curious people, sorry.
We're
So-
getting nice close up there.
I know. So and that what I meant by keep that cap on is that the top can come off so you don't have to feed through that small thing. But I find that it helps with creating a nice hot environment and nice solid pellet. Different times of year influence pellet formation in Indiana in a non-controlled, is my garage environment, so that in the hot, humid July, by the time it hits that bin, it's already soaking up the moisture and softening the pellet, and that becomes a big problem for application. So the pelleting system is moving to a new barn we just finished that is environmentally controlled. So we hope that will allow us to pellet more without that problem. So.
How does it application? Like, why did you say that that's the extra humidity affects the?
Oh, the water, moisture in the air, it's taken up by the pellet, and so it expands it starts to soften or expand the pellet. So it doesn't keep that really hard configuration that it has initially from being heated with the lanolin, that keeps it glued together.
Why is that a problem?
Well, Rachel Jones will tell you that that's a big problem.
It just makes it harder to spread.
Mhm.
Oh,
Mhm.
How does that affect packaging then, if you were packaging it in July or so?
So packaging, they will stay, packaged as long as they're sealed for up to 4 years. So, and you can see the pellets in here and see that they're packaged. If you, and so that packaging is a big consideration. Especially if you're thinking, we're thinking the wholesale market and delivery of that to specialty craft growers that may not use it right away, but want to take advantage of a bulk purchase. And so how do we make sure that that pellet's going to be the same when they get ready to apply it? We put in, again, I see the dinner plate size. Sorry. Okay. And so here is just our wool pellet analysis so that you can see we did that for our own wool pellets. And this is all Indiana sourced wool. Most of this was all from my sheep. I stockpiled a whole lot of waste wool. Most of it, like I said, goes into making product, but the stockpiled a lot of waste wool and then have since purchased wool locally. So the and you can just see the composition here with our nitrogen is coming in at little over 9%, 9.1%, and that we have organic matter is at about 82%, and that's and phosphorus very little, potassium little over 2%. And then you can see the other trace minerals that we have here as well. But these are usually not considered sufficient in most, if you are needing those minerals in your growing system, you will have to add those additionally. So we had at Marvinine Farm, we were looking at that compared to a grower's standard. And so the wool pellet nitrogen application was determined based upon their soil tests and their grower standard and what they were looking to achieve in their fields. And then at Marble Hill, we wanted to know a little bit more about the actual, what everybody touts as the application rate for wool pellets. So we used that and with our compost system that we use for growing. We are not the growers that these guys are, but we do our best. So next, I want to turn it over to Rachel and Jonas to talk about applying the wool pellets. And this was their, you don't have to talk about that if you don't want to, but these were the actual amendments, and so that you can kind of see what their system looks like. And then they're going to talk about the integration of the wool pellets, and we have some pictures for you. So I can advance the slides for you.
Yeah, so generally speaking, we'll have some photos of how we spread things about. I don't know. Yeah, so you can kind of see our general bed prep here as we grow in raised beds pretty much exclusively, because we have a high water table, and so that really helps us get up out of the water. We use a BCS walk behind tractor to do that work with a rotary plow that basically just shoots soil to the right from the pathway to create a raised bed. And generally speaking, we're working with Ohio Earth Foods, Revita, Compost Plus, or other type products, poultry-based manure, and we use a really simple drop cedar spreader to spread that on the bed. So here you can see kind of a comparison of like the amount of the chicken product versus wool, and you can see obviously the consistency is very different. And here's the beds. One issue we found with the pellets was that it didn't work with this drop spreader. I think if you had maybe like a larger scale, one of the like larger cones that go on the back of a tractor, maybe it worked better because the opening's a little wider. With this drop spreader, it's not meant for as big a product, and so it there is like a little kind of breaker upper guy in there that's wheel driven, but it wasn't enough to break it into small enough pieces that it would flow. Or you do like 20 laps with it, and that's not very fun. It's already like 3 down at backs or something for the standard product that we're using. So we threw that out by hand, with bucket, which meant that we found we needed to use a little bit more product to feel like we got an even distribution over the bed. And from there, we do, incorporate that. So here's a nice close-up. You can kind of see like, it's a lot more product when you're using a 343 versus a, 902 kind of MPK, input. But we feel like there was good coverage, and we can talk a little bit more about like, how that ended up looking as far as like crop health. And just, we'll talk a little bit more about how we, incorporate that. So we basically treated this wool as the same as we normally would, just so we did have kind of a standard of how does this fit to our applicate or our process? And we didn't really want to like, we wanted to give it a fair shot against the chicken, which is like the gold standard for veggie growers, right? So we do use tillage. We have a rototiller for the BCS. So we incorporate that to about 6 inches or less. And yeah. And here's the crew planting. This is in a hoop house. This was our kale for the project. And we did use landscaping fabric on the kale. It's a long-term crop, for us. This was planted in late October, and we're still harvesting this. And we have had a huge problem with harlequin bugs the past few years. And so basically every brassica, yeah, the year before a bit, but basically any brassica we now plant, we need to put crop protection on. So we use Protect Net, which is the crop netting. We've tried a couple different types, but and that works pretty well. Like they're crafty creatures. Like they get under it. There's no way to keep them all out, but it reduces the population enough. But and we haven't found any effective really organic sprays that really do much for them. So exclusion is our best bet, we find. Yeah, and you want to maybe talk?
So another cool thing we did as part of this project, in addition to using the wool pellets, was we borrowed some of Kip and Whitney's sheep and brought them over to one of our properties and rotated them for the summer. And it was really the first experience that we've had integrating livestock into our system. And they weren't in any areas that are in production right now, but it was a really positive experience just to learn more about sheep. We think they're a really good animal for the land that we have. And so it was a fun experience. Jonas did most of the caretaking.
Yeah, I've always felt like sheep are a good match for our land with the water issues that we have with their light impact. And like, I'm really interested in fruit production and like mixed polycultural orchard, really diverse, fruit, plantings and perennial plantings. So I felt like they were a good mix for like a silvopasture model. And so this area that they were grazing in is what I see as a future kind of orchard that I'm working on.
But it definitely, was a good dip our toes into integrating animals. And then we got to give them back. So you don't have to worry about them all.
Yeah, they were great. And just seeing the impact and having them mowing is, that's really great, use.
Yeah, and so this was really our first experience with our farm having a research project, and that in itself was a learning experience because you're obviously learning from the data you're collecting, right? But figuring out as a farm that has already a lot of variables and a lot of moving parts, how we were going to add the data collection into our workflow. It was overall a really positive experience, but it was a pivot for us. And it took us, like, we got a late start on collecting data for our melons and potatoes because we hadn't figured out how to use the tensiometers, which are these moisture measuring tools, and other things like that. We had to have the spreadsheets in place, and we ended up assigning our employee Jesse to do the weekly and daily data collection. And that ended up being the best fit for us because we just have too many other things that we're thinking about. And she had her days that she would just go first thing. And Whitney found some tools that helped us with the data collection, like the tensiometers. We had never used those before. But they really provide a lot of information about where your soil is actually at with moisture content instead of, I have always just done it by hand, you know, reach in there and feel, does it feel dry or moist, or how much has it rained? But that provides you real numbers, and it's probably that kind of tool we're gonna keep using. And then you also got these sensors that track the temperature and humidity wherever they're located. And then you can just come bring your phone and it'll download that information. So now we use it when we're over at the house at home to see what temperature it's out in the greenhouse to make sure that the roll-up sides are working across the road. So there have been these tools that we have discovered through the process of doing this research that will be useful in our system long-term beyond learning about the wool pellets. It has been a time-consuming though, like don't have experience with research, so it was sort of an eye-opening experience to realize that it does take a lot of time every day to collect that data and compile it into spreadsheets and look through it, and the planning that we had to do between our farms, that took time. So if any of you are thinking about doing a research project, just be really realistic about the fact that it's going to take time and be work. What else?
Scale it back.
Yeah.
That's our,
One crop, not 7.
I
We also felt, you know, it's like,
Well,
doing
we
this, it's,
started to do fewer crops,
Yeah.
and then we were
Yeah.
confused about the budget, and there was actually more money available than we
yeah.
had realized, and so we had to go back and we decided to add more crops.
And with, as vegetables, really diverse veggie growers, we're always like, we have so much diversity, so I feel like it wasn't like anything new to think like, well, why wouldn't we do 7 crops to see if like,
Yeah.
you know, the magic for the potatoes was the wool, you know?
I think otherwise, we had a really positive experience working with our neighbors and learning about what each other do. We learned so much more about wool and the sheep industry, and just deepening those relationships, because as small farms, we have a number of neighbors who are doing similar kinds of things, and ways that we can rely on each other and build off what we're all doing is really positive.
Yeah, that last point of it was, if wool pellets are more pleasurable than chicken manure fertilizer, like just the like, not just the smell, like it's not great to handle, it's really dusty, like,
The chicken.
yeah, the chicken manure, but the wool, it's like, I love the smell of sheep. Not everyone's that
We
way,
share
but
that.
yeah, I'm like, "Oh, it smells so good," I'm like, yes, okay.
So right now, we're in the process of analyzing all of the data that's been collected. Whitney shared all of those data points, the temperature, the moisture, all of that. We did pre and post soil samples. We also took tissue samples and mailed the tissues to labs for analysis. And really the biggest takeaway from all this for us is that the wool pellet and the chicken manure, the pellets are able to produce comparable healthy plants. Like visually, we could not tell any difference between the wool pellet potatoes and the chicken manure potatoes, or on any of the crops. They visually all look the same. There wasn't really any visual difference in the soil quality though at the end of the year either. Like when we dug potatoes and dug carrots, the wool pellets had fully disintegrated. The only difference we did observe was in yield. There was a slightly lower yield in the wool pellet beds compared to the chicken manure.
And we wanted to share some of that crop production with you with the just looking at the potato crop. And I'm going to start with our crop where we saw a benefit of the wool pellets relative to just compost. So we weren't comparing to the addition of any other soil amendment other than just what we grow normally our just compost. And so that was a benefit. And then for us, and then for the for Mavernine Farm, for their there was a 27% difference with their grower standard being more than the wool pellet yield. And we've got there's a lot of data on these slides, but they'll be available so that you can see, look at the soil samples as well. And trying to make sense of that, again, I'm going to lean towards the nitrogen availability. And so we have a lot to learn, and we're going to be working with folks at Purdue and to help us in figuring that out about what kinds of explanations we might see that could explain the differences. They're not, they're not wild, but that still equates to lost profit. And so, we want to, and maybe what it's telling us also is that wool isn't all in all of itself the magic, right? And that we need to figure out how to balance that with other additions. And I think that that's a really valuable insight as
Yeah,
well.
I think, this is mentioned in a slide later, but the composted chicken manure reuse is not just chicken manure. There are other things that have been added to it specifically to provide optimal plant nutrition for vegetables. And the wool pellets, nothing has been added to them. They're just the wool pellets. So
We did add like
we added
some rock phosphate and some azomite, and we tried to balance like what it was just basically the nitrogen replacement. And so when we put that into our soil calculator, it was, if we needed that phosphorus in that specific area, we would put down that. But yeah, like the Revita has the humate and kelp, which aids in that absorption of the nitrogen. So
And so one of the crops that Rachel and Jonas grew was watermelon. And this one, again, just showing you some yield data, since at the end of the day, that's what matters to our crop producers. And we want to have healthy soil as well. But in our first year with the pellets, that's integrated into the soil. That's what we saw, again, a slight decrease with the pellets over the grower standard. And that's a trend throughout our crops for, so this is broccoli. So that, again, a slight difference, but I think it's important also to note that visually, they wouldn't have predicted that necessarily, so that the plants look healthy. And that kale, on the other hand, I was excited about this one.
we have not finished collecting kale yet. Still being had.
It still could weave it out, but whatever the case is, at this particular moment in time.
there's good data.
There's good data from my perspective, but no, I know that wool pellets are not the, end all for, but because there has been positive response in the literature, it was, I'd like to be able to see some of that for ourselves. And so we certainly saw it when we used a higher application rate and no other addition and no other comparison, but except with the kale. And so, and this might be explained by what I understand as a new field for you. Is this a new field?
No, it's a new tunnel.
Okay.
So the place where the kale and spinach were planted had been in watermelon and squash production through the summer, and we built a new tunnel in the fall. And so it was a second crop that was
Okay.
here.
And really,
So
the
was it
yield-
planted where the watermelon was planted?
No,
No,
Okay.
close. I started thinking about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think so.
no.
okay.
Um, that could be the residual.
I know.
nitrogen from it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But collecting the yield data was also one of the easier data points for us because we're already doing that, right? Like we want to know what we're harvesting and what we're selling and all that.
Yeah.
Now for crops like broccoli and kale and spinach, it's a little more tedious than like melon, where it's like we're harvesting at once and it's like easy numbers, where it's like we had to keep separate bins when we were harvesting for the broccoli, which is, a little more tedious, but it's an easy point to catch.
and the last crop that we're sharing is the,
It was outside, yeah.
Yeah, I should have said that, yeah. So the spinach and the kale are high tunnel crops. So we looked at both high tunnel crops and field crops. And so these were the two high tunnel crops. And then for we grew peppers and beans in a high tunnel. And so we'll have those data available as well. And then for the spinach, again, we were seeing somewhere like on average about a 20% difference in
But we are
across the
still
crops.
harvesting spinach.
And we're still harvesting spinach. You never know. So,
I feel like in the tunnel, one thing I've been wanting to do is check that, you know, are we seeing any pellet residue? Because that's the biggest question I get from other growers. It's like, oh, are you seeing that? What's it doing to the soil structure questions? And I'm kind of like, we didn't really notice it with some of the, like the carrots and potatoes, but I wonder if there's anything different in the tunnel. You know,
yeah,
so I'm gonna do a little digging around, or rooting around.
rooting around. So these are just a few takeaways for the crop production, just thinking about nitrogen availability of the different products that are used. The long term, really interested in looking at what that might be in terms of soil health and then how that translates down the road into yield. And then one of the key things is just on-farm investigation is central to being able to understand how new products are going to work and how and then also if we were looking to integrate livestock and crop growing in new and different ways, that has to happen on the farm. And while I truly value the controlled studies that are done at our land grant institutions, when the rubber hits the road, as they say, is here. And so we have further analysis to do, so stay tuned as we try to make sense of our soil tests and our tissues. And then really the SARE program funding mitigates risk. And so for those of you who are looking to innovate and to try new things, that's a really important consideration, and that as you move forward.
Yeah, and the grant it paid for our time to collect the data and do the planning. And it helped pay for the pellet machine. It also helped pay for fence in one of our areas that we were doing the trial beds. So there were, it was financially evened out for us.
How are we doing on time? What's our?
We are about out of time.
Out of time, okay.
Well, these are just real quick, a few things that we're looking at with, how can we build on what we've discovered and found? I think a really key thing is figuring out ways to scale the wool pellet production, to make it as affordable or closer to affordable as chicken manure. And there are the other benefits besides just the fertility, that you have to take into consideration. Looking at the size, shape of the pellet itself for spreadability. Yeah.
And we have done a lot of outreach and as part of our part of the grant process. And so we've done a field day that was helped us, our soil and water district helped us with that. We also did some presentations. I did one for the Indiana Sheep Association, community gardens, state fair, and other places to try and they're listed here, just to try and share. And also the more you share, the more feedback you get, the more you begin to understand, your own, what you're doing and your own research and ways of moving forward. And so lastly, we hope that we've inspired you today to think about local application of wool and maybe start your own projects. And then also just the many things that you can do with wool. Here's in erosion control to crops, to home and gardens, we just insulated our new barn with wool. So there are lots of applications and Indiana Sheep Association, we're looking to develop a network of partnerships to advance the wool industry. and integration. And so with that, we thank you very much for coming this morning.